They didn't know she'd killed men with her bare hands when they dragged her sister into the desert. Mira Callahan arrived in redemption with the silence of a thunderhead, slow-moving, full of weight, and ready to split the sky. She rode a horse that looked older than the town's chapel and carried no rifle, only a leather satchel and a scar on her jawline that didn't heal straight. The townsfolk paused when she passed, not because they recognized her, but because something primal inside them did. She was the kind of quiet that followed explosions. No one greeted her. The sign that welcomed strangers into redemption was rusted through at the hinges. One of the S hung sideways, as if the town couldn't be bothered to finish its own name. Its only street was lined with sun-bleached facades, sheriff's office, saloon, feed store, chapel, and the kind of hush that suggested fear lived here rent-free. She paid for a room at the widow Greeley's boarding house with 2 coins and a stare that made the old woman swallow hard. "You alone?" the widow asked. "Just me," Mira said, voice low as gravel. "No kin? No man? Both buried." The widow pursed her lips, uncomfortable but intrigued, and handed over a key. "Room at the back. Best for people who don't like to be seen," she said. Mira didn't answer. Later, at the general store, she asked for a grave map. The clerk offered her a crooked grin instead. "We don't get many women looking to dig up the dead," he said. "Not looking to dig," she replied. "Just want to know where she lies." That night, she found the grave. A crooked cross. Sarah Callahan carved in shaky lettering. No dates, no flowers, just red dirt and silence. Mira stood over it like a sentry, eyes burning holes in the horizon. They'd said it was cholera, but Mira had read the letter too many times to believe it. No mention of doctors, just a hurried signature from the sheriff, and a town name that didn't match the one her sister had said she was headed to. Redemption. She stayed in that position until night swallowed the sky. When she walked back, she passed the saloon. Laughter spilled out like blood from a wound. 3 men leaned against the porch railing, drunk on power and drink. Jed, the biggest of the 3, tilted his head as she passed. "Evening, sweetheart." Mira didn't stop. "Don't be rude now," said Harlan, the wiry one. "A lady like you oughta be grateful someone speak and kindly." Still she walked. The third one, Cole, clicked his tongue. "Don't think she likes men. Might need remind in how useful we can be." She didn't turn, but she heard their laughter behind her and made a note of their names in the ledger of her mind. At dawn, the widow's daughter, Annie, disappeared. The town gathered quickly, whispering in clusters, all wide eyes and useless hands. The sheriff, round, sweating, and silent, offered shrug. "Probably wandered off," he said. "She's 9, the widow snapped. "She don't wander." Mira watched it all from the boarding house porch, arms folded, saying nothing, until she saw the doll. It lay in the alley behind the chapel, missing an eye. Mira picked it up. Its arm was ripped. Mud caked the hem of its stitched dress. She turned her gaze to the ground. Scuff marks, a heel dragged, faint blood spatters heading toward the stable. No one followed her when she walked. The stables were quiet. A lantern still burned inside. Mira pushed the door open slow, soft. No movement, just hay and shadow. She found Annie behind the trough, curled like a thing that had been hunted. Her dress torn, lips split, eyes wide and staring at nothing. Mira knelt slowly. "I'm not going to touch you," she said. "I'm just here." Annie blinked once, then turned her face into the wall. Later, the widow took the girl home, thanked no one, spoke to no one. The town turned away. That evening, Mira cleaned a long-forgotten knife by lantern light. The steel reflected her eyes, tired, hard, knowing. She rolled her sleeves, revealing forearms corded with old scars, some from blades, some from ropes. She tied her hair back like she had in the war. The same knot, the same quiet, the same purpose. She hadn't planned to stay. She hadn't planned to fight. But something inside her snapped when she saw the girl's face. It was like looking at her sister again, after the Confederate camp. After the silence. After everything. She remembered what the surgeon had whispered when they'd freed her from the enemy line. "You lived. That's all that matters now." But it wasn't true. Survival wasn't enough. Not when the men who did it went on laughing. That night, Mira walked through redemption like smoke, unseen, steady. She knew the layout of the saloon before she entered. She'd been watching. She knew that Jed played cards with his back to the stairwell. Knew that Harlan never locked the back gate. Knew Cole spent 10 minutes alone outside every night, relieving himself by the well. She moved without hesitation. Through the alley, up the back stairs, past the storage closet. Cole was first. He never saw the shadow behind him. Just a whisper of motion and then pain, sharp, stunning. She left him gagged and unconscious beside the horses. Harlan heard something in the storage room. Opened the door. Her boot caught his knee sideways. He crumpled. Before he could scream, her fist found his throat. Then the dark took him. Jed was still laughing at the table when she dropped Cole's badge on the floor in front of him. The room fell still. "What's this?" he asked, squinting. Mira stepped out of the shadow. "You remember me?" she asked. He stood slowly, confused, then furious. "You got a death wish, girl." Mira didn't blink. "You touched my sister. 5 years ago. South of Alton. I was in the cage next to hers." Realization hit his face like a bullet. He went for his gun. She was faster. The knife sank into his shoulder before his hand even reached the holster. He screamed, but she was already on him, blade twisting, then gone, then reappearing under his chin. The saloon stayed silent. No one moved. Blood pooled at her boots. "I told you," she whispered, "survival's not enough." Then she turned and walked out, leaving Jed screaming behind her, the others unconscious, and the town of Redemption gasping in the wake of a woman they had tried so hard not to see. Jed didn't die, but he screamed like he had. The sheriff called it an altercation and said Mira ought to leave town before someone took her silence as a threat. But no one touched her, not after what she did to Silas Black's men. Fear, she'd learned, was the fastest way to be left alone. Fear wrapped tighter than gossip ever could. The saloon stayed open but quieter. Harlan hadn't been seen since. Cole had fled during the night, muttering something about shadows with eyes. Only Jed remained, slumped in a chair most evenings, his arm in a sling, his pride gutted. Mira returned to walking the streets with steady purpose. Her eyes were always moving. Windows, door frames, the shift of boots behind swinging saloon doors. Her training never left her. The war had burned it into her blood. Annie started to follow her again. This time, Mira didn't pretend not to notice. They shared few words. Annie wasn't ready, but she carried that rag doll again, stitched anew with mismatched thread. She would leave it in places Mira had stood, on the chapel steps, on the boarding house porch, on a crate near the stables, like a small, wordless tribute, or an offering. One evening, Mira left a tin of hard candy on Annie's windowsill. A small thing, but it made the girl smile the next morning, even if she tried not to show it. Silas Black didn't smile. Jed may have returned broken, but Silas didn't like reminders of failure. His men had run. His name was whispered softer. He watched Mira from the upstairs saloon window like a man measuring the weight of a storm. "You sure she's just a woman?" he asked the sheriff one night, whiskey in hand. "She's a soldier," the sheriff muttered. "Not the kind we bury with flags, either." "I don't care what she was," Silas snapped. "She makes me look small. That can't stand." He waited for Mira to slip, for her to fight again, to fall out of favor with the town. But redemption had begun to shift, barely, quietly, like a body waking after a long sleep. The widow Greeley started leaving fresh bread on Myra's windowsill. The blacksmith nodded to her in passing. A boy offered to shine her boots for free. The town hadn't forgiven its silence, but it had started to recognize its weight. Still, nothing in redemption changed without something being taken first. It was the preacher's son they found next, hung from the water tower, a sign pinned to his chest with a nail through scripture. "One soldier brings a war." The preacher wept. The sheriff looked the other way. The townsfolk pretended not to read the words. Mira did. That night she packed, not to run, but to prepare. She strapped a knife to her calf, loaded a 6-shot she hadn't touched in 3 years, and opened the map of the town she'd drawn in her ledger. Every alley, every ladder, every blind corner. Annie watched her from the doorway. "Are they coming for you?" the girl asked. Mira didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the rag doll, sitting on her bedside table like a quiet guardian. She held it out. "I need you to take this," she said. "Why?" "Because you still believe people can be good. That's what this doll means." Annie clutched it like it might disappear. "Where will you go?" she whispered. Mira brushed a strand of hair behind the girl's ear, a gesture born of instinct, not memory. "I'm not going anywhere." Word came by morning. Silas had called a town meeting. Said the sheriff was stepping down. Said redemption needed a reset. The chapel's bell rang at noon. Mira was already there, hidden in the rafters, watching as the town filed in. Reluctant, restless, sensing something off. Silas stood near the altar, flanked by two new men. Outsiders. Hired killers by the way they carried their weight, loose-hipped and ready. He didn't bother with scripture. "I won't pretend we haven't had trouble," he said. "A woman comes in, does what she pleases, lays hands on men with good reputations, and you all start thinking you're owed justice." Murmurs rippled. "You're not," he continued. "You're owed peace. Order. And I'm here to give you that." The door shut behind them with a hard bang. Annie squeezed the widow's hand. Silas gestured to the newcomers. "These men are here to ensure that peace. Starting now, we'll be enforcing curfew. No gatherings after sundown. And anyone found aiding our little vigilante will be." A sound interrupted him. A creak, faint, above their heads. Then a voice, low and measured. "You call it peace. I call it silence you paid for with girls like my sister." Every head turned upward. Mira dropped from the rafters like a ghost in boots. Landed in a crouch. Rose without hurry. Gun drawn, steady as scripture. One of Silas's men reached. She shot him in the thigh. He went down screaming. The second lunged. She sidestepped, knife drawn, catching his arm, then his ribs. He folded. Fast. Silas staggered back, shock turning his mouth slack. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," Mira said. "You don't belong here," he spat. "You're right," she said. "Neither did Sarah." She raised the gun. Silence blanketed the chapel. "Go ahead," Silas sneered. "Kill me in a church." Myra's finger twitched but didn't pull. Instead, she lowered the gun, tossed it, stepped forward and backhanded him hard enough to send him stumbling into the pews. "She never got justice," Mira said, voice cracking now. "But this town still can." She turned to the people. "You all know what he's done. What he let happen. You felt it, heard it, hid from it. But not anymore." No one moved. Then the widow stood. "I saw Annie," she said. "That night. I knew." I said nothing. Others stood. The barkeep, the stable hand, the clerk from the store. One by one, Mira stood still, a soldier in a chapel, watching shame give way to truth. Then Annie stepped forward, holding her rag doll. She handed it to Mira. "You kept your promise." Mira knelt, one knee in the dust. Her breath hitched, then steadied. "I'm trying," she whispered. And behind her, redemption began to wake. The next morning, redemption didn't quite know what to do with its breath. Silas Black sat in the jailhouse, one eye swollen shut, wrist bound, stripped of the silver belt buckle he used to polish like a crown. The sheriff's chair stood empty, and no one rushed to fill it. The people weren't ready to name a new law, but they had stopped listening to the old one. The preacher rang the chapel bell without being asked. Mira didn't sleep that night. She stayed in the barn, where the horses shifted softly in their stalls, and the air smelled of straw and dust. She sat cross-legged on the loft floor, cleaning her blade one last time. Not out of fear. Ritual. The town would need her for a little while longer. That much she understood. Justice, she'd learned, doesn't come in a flash. It arrives slowly, like dawn crawling over a broken sky. You make room for it. You clear space. At first, no one approached her. There was reverence in the silence, not distance. Like watching a fire still smoldering, unsure if it would warm or burn. By midday, Annie crept into the barn and stood beside her. "Did you always know you could fight like that?" Mira looked at the child's face, open and full of the questions she'd buried in herself for too long. "No," she said softly, "but I always knew I had to." Annie nodded, as if the answer made perfect sense. She handed Mira a folded piece of paper, a drawing. Mira and Annie, side by side, the chapel behind them and the sun drawn large in the corner, with long yellow lines that spilled past the borders. "Are you leaving?" Annie asked. Mira hesitated. "I haven't decided yet." Redemption wasn't hers. She hadn't come to stay. But part of her had grown tethered to it in ways she hadn't expected, like a root buried in soil she'd tried not to care about. Widow Greeley stopped Mira later that day, holding a jar of preserved peaches, eyes rimmed red but clear. She didn't apologize, didn't beg forgiveness for her silence. Instead, she said, "Thank you for letting my daughter stay a child." That evening, Mira walked the edge of town. The wind was soft. Coyotes cried in the hills. Smoke rose from chimneys and calm, spiraled ribbons. She reached the graveyard. Sarah's cross stood exactly where it had, still crooked, still unadorned. But now someone had left flowers. Wild sage, juniper, a ribbon tied neatly in a bough. Mira sank to her knees in the dirt, rested her palm on the wood. Her body folded, not broken but tired. Her grief wasn't loud. It never had been. It lived in the way she watched the sky, in the pause before she spoke, in the way her hands shook after violence, not during. "I kept my promise," she whispered. She stayed there a long time, until the sun began to slip, until the wind picked up just enough to stir the grass. Then she rose, dusted her knees, and heard the first scream. It came from the north end of town. A man's voice, sharp, panicked. Then gunshots. Then chaos. She ran. By the time she reached the square, a fire had already taken hold of the feed store. Flames licked the windows, painting the sky orange. People scattered. A second building had been marked, black paint across the door. "Note justice without cost." It wasn't Silas. He hadn't moved from his cell. This was retaliation. Someone else. Someone with less patience for power-shifting hands. 3 men. Unfamiliar faces. Bandanas over mouths. Long rifles. They shot into the air, herded people like cattle. Fear returned to redemption in an instant. Old fear. Root-deep fear. Mira ducked behind the water trough. Assessed. Calculated. One by the bank. One behind the chapel. One on the boarding house roof. She couldn't flank them all. Not fast enough. Not alone. But she wasn't alone. The blacksmith appeared from the livery, hammer in hand, crouched low. The barkeep dragged a wounded boy to safety. And then, there she was. Annie, standing behind the preacher, eyes locked on Mira, holding the rag doll in one hand and a rock in the other. Mira nodded once. Annie didn't move. "Good. Stay there." The shooter on the roof raised his rifle, aiming toward the chapel. Mira stepped out calm, gun in hand. Fired. The man toppled backwards with a scream, rolled off the roof, landed hard. The one by the bank turned. Mira dropped to one knee, took the shot clean. He fell sideways, groaning. The last turned and ran. But the blacksmith was faster. The hammer hit him square in the gut. He folded like linen. When it was over, the town stood in stunned quiet. Then footsteps. Then shouts. The fire still burned, but people had found buckets. A chain formed. Water passed hand to hand. Voices shouted direction, not panic. And Mira stood in the middle of it all, breathing hard, blood on her hands, flame reflecting in her eyes. She was a soldier again, but this time the war felt worth it. Later, after the fires were out and the wounded treated, after the last bullet was accounted for, the preacher approached her. Redemption's been waiting a long time to earn its name. Mira didn't speak, just watched the stars return to the sky. "Will you stay?" he asked. She looked at Annie, who sat on the chapel steps, swinging her legs, humming to herself. Looked at the people working together in the dark. Looked at Sarah's cross on the hill. "I might," she said, but she knew better than to promise. The road still called her, but so did this place. That night, Mira packed her things. Not to leave, not just yet, but to be ready for whatever came next. She sat outside the boarding house as dawn approached. Annie slept curled up beside her, head resting on Myra's coat. In the distance, the rooster crowed. A new day. Mira looked out across the dirt road, the hills beyond, the fire-scarred boards, and the quiet hearts stitched back together by survival and grace. And for the first time in years, she smiled. Not wide, not showy, but enough to feel it. And to those who might one day ask what really happened in redemption, who the woman was that carried thunder in her silence, she would say only this: sometimes justice doesn't ride in on a white horse. Sometimes she walks in alone, bloodied but unbroken, and teaches a town to stop pretending it can't save itself. Then she closed her eyes and let herself rest, without fear.